Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joe's Classic Video Games back with another cool arcade game repair video for you today. We are working on one of the granddaddies of the arcade scene, Asteroids, and we did a video already of part of this, but we bought this off of a local operator, and it had been parted out in a lot of ways and was in pretty rough shape. And the first thing that we did was we had to track down another power brick for the bottom, and then we had to track down another power supply for the side, and we worked on both of those. And at the end of the first video, we had gotten up to the point where we were testing out the game board, and I couldn't get the thing to do anything. It just had a couple the LEDs on the start LEDs were lit up. The monitor, we can't get to do anything. And so we are now to the point where we're going to work on the monitor and on the game board. So this is actually the game board that we were testing in the last video. But what I did was I happen to have these vector games are a little tricky to repair because if there's nothing on the monitor, that can be either a game board problem or a monitor problem. So it's kind of hard to track that down. So one of the things that I've done is I've got this Asteroids board here that works, but every once in a while it'll reset after it's on for a while. But I may have done a video about that thing a year ago or a year and a half ago. But this board actually does work and plays, but after a while it'll reset. And I haven't figured out why it does that yet. But because of that, it's a really good test board because I can put it in a cabinet and see if the rest of the cabinet works. So what I've done is I've put it in this cabinet, and I've discovered that the sound in this cabinet doesn't work and the monitor doesn't work. So the monitor's not doing anything except there is a spot killer light, as they call it, on the deflection board. So the monitor's not working and the sound isn't working. So just by having that screwed up board, I'm able to kind of figure out that that's where my problems are so far. So we're going to try to get the monitor working and the sound working with this screwed up board, and then I can put this board here that came with the game back in it. I could just try to fix this one that has the reset problem, but unfortunately I've been messing with it a lot and I haven't figured it out yet. So it's probably going to be easier to fix this board than it is to finally figure out what's wrong with this board. Everybody that works on games has a pile of PCBs that kind of work, but they've got one little thing, you know, and that's what this one is. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the marquee off and see what the speaker looks like. Look, the poor old light bulb has been trying to work this whole time. I just didn't realize it. So once you take the marquee off, there are two little screws over in the corner, and this whole thing can slide out and we can look at the speaker and see what kind of shape it's in. Alright, so after revealing the speaker, as you can see, one of the wires that connects to the cone is broke. You can see the one down there, the other one is no longer connected to the cone. It's completely missing. I'm going to blame it on a rat. Okay, so we've got the one that supposedly works back in it, which I believe it has died on us now because my LEDs started doing the flash of death. Whenever they're doing that, it just means that it's resetting over and over and over again. Okay, and I was going to replace the speaker, but then I thought, you know, I can see what's messed up with it. Why don't I just try replacing the wire? So I did. I soldered a new wire on. So now, and this is the board that I believe to have worked, but I'm not getting any video and I'm not getting any sound. So we're going to put it in test. So if you take it out of test, you just get the blinking lights. So we've got two boards to fix. So I'm wondering if whatever was making it reset has finally died, and so now this board is fixable, you know. So I'll show you how we walk through it. So we're getting a resetting, and I'll show you why it's doing that. But basically what I've done is we fixed the sound by soldering that wire back on the speaker. So because of that, we can now hear error codes and what it's doing. The chirping indicates that it's resetting over and over again. Eventually we'll get it to a point, this board and the other board, where when you turn it on, if it has an error, in test mode it'll give you some beeps and boops that tell you which RAM's wrong. So what I'm going to try to do is we'll get this one where it seems like it's playing and we can hear it playing, and then we'll fix the monitor. But let's mess with the board first. Another clue that we've got: turn it off and back on, and it looks like it's fine. That's how it's supposed to blink. But watch whenever I hit start, it immediately goes into the flash, 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 flash. So starting the game immediately makes everything start resetting. So maybe when you start the game, it tries to draw the spaceship, and as soon as it tries to draw the spaceship, it errors out and makes everything reset. Something like that. Or it might be like a text thing. All right, so we're going to test all the voltages just to make sure everything's in here and see if I can find them all at least. It's still in its weird thing where it doesn't start. So let's see here. There's a ground lug here. Maybe I can permanently put that on there without shorting anything. So we're looking for 5 volt. I've got 5.18. I'll move that like that. You might be able to see it. Got 5.18. That's good. It's a little bit high, but you kind of want it like that. And then there's a bunch of other voltages. The way I always test them is you can very carefully test them on these transistors here. Don't slip. So that's the ground. It's negative 25, so our negative 25 is on the board. Negative 15, so our negative 15, let me make sure we've got all these. Negative 15, negative 20, okay. 25. And 5. The 5 here is for just to run these DAC chips. So that's there. Our 25 is there. It's supposed to be 22, but you know, same thing. And then I can't remember what this one is. Yep. Okay. So I need a 12 volt, a negative 8, and a positive 8. I can't ever remember where the negative 8 and positive 8 Let's see what I can find up on this transistor. 25. It's going to be ground, and this will be 12. So there's my 12. Got 12. So I should have a positive 8 and a negative 8. Okay, so it's this little diode here and this little diode here. Whoop, it doesn't like me wiggling stuff. Negative 7.62. Positive 7.92. That's, you know, that very well might be the right, that might be close enough, I don't know. So we'll put negative 7.62 and positive 7.9. Okay, so I don't know how exact those have to be. You would think if they want 8.2 that's pretty exact, but on the other hand, both voltages are off, so you wouldn't think that if there was a failure, it would just be one of them or the other. You would think. I don't know. So we're just doing all kinds of weird stuff, locking up and making noises and things like that. A lot of times, if it's doing that, it's because of the power is fluctuating, and sometimes that can be that big blue capacitor in the bottom. But we've already changed that. So on the, it's probably something on the board. So the first thing that you would also check the edge connector. All of that seems fine on the board and in the cabinet. So the next thing that you check is you start with the beginning of the board and work your way through it. Well, the very beginning is the clock signal. So this is the crystal that creates the clock signal. And it's loose. It's not in there very good. If you look real close, I can actually make it move. So that might be our whole problem with this board. But remember, this is the board that at one time was pretty much working, but just resetting a lot. So I'm wondering if that was messed up with it back then too. That would definitely make it reset. So I'll resolder that and we'll pop it back in and see if it's any better. Put it back in the cabinet after resoldering the crystal. Same thing, it's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So since this one I already know to be a problem child, we're going to ping pong back onto the other one that's a new one under the hopes that it'll be something simple, right? So what this one is doing, I tested all the voltages just like we just did on the other one. All of the voltages are there, and the negative 8.2 and the regular 8.2 are dead on the money. So that maybe that's a clue to this one, because on this one they were short. They weren't quite right. But on this one they're dead on the money, right? So this one, whenever you put it in, whether you've got it in test mode or in normal mode, the lights are just on the LED, on the control panel, the start ones. So the first thing you check, of course, is the clock signal. So I'll show you how to do this stuff. We've hooked up a logic probe. These are just simple little things. They're like 15 bucks or something. You put the ground probe on one side, the red probe on the 5-volt side. And then you can go through and look at some of the signals. So for instance, this is the MPU, or the CPU I should say. And the first signal that any CPU needs, it needs power, and then it also needs the clock signal. So on this one, the clock signal comes in on pin 37. So let's see what happens when we probe 37. So see how the red and the green are light up and it's blinking. So that's the clock signal that you're seeing. Now, is the clock signal right? Hell, I don't know. All I know is there's something going on there, right? So what this logic probe is going to be able to find is stuff that's missing. It's not going to find if something's wrong. So if the clock signal is supposed to be 3 megahertz or whatever, and right now it's 2 megahertz, I would have no way of knowing that with this. You'd need an oscilloscope to figure that out. But it can help you find certain things. So the first thing that it does is you need the clock. And then you need this reset signal here. And the reset comes from this watchdog circuit, right? So basically when the game starts, or I mean whenever the board tries to boot up, it gets 5 volts, but there's an issue where whenever you first turn it on, the 5 volts isn't 5 volts yet. So instead of it trying to launch code and do its thing whenever the voltage is at like 3 volts, because maybe it's just turning on or whatever, it waits a second. And then it has a reset circuit built in where it resets it after a second. So the way this one works is that pin 40, when the board first comes on, it's held low. And by holding it low, it keeps the CPU turned off where it doesn't do anything. And then after a split second, it's like half of a second, which is faster than I can even count. Like after a split second, it goes high, and it stays high the whole time that the game's on. So what's the purpose of all that? It's so that when it boots up properly, and then it's the watchdog. It's also the reset circuit is hooked into what's called the watchdog circuit. So there is a watchdog design on the board where if anything screws up, the board will reset. So if anything screws up in the code or something doesn't work the way it's supposed to and the board figures it out, it will basically make signals go a certain way so that the watchdog circuit makes that pin go low again. And by that pin number 40 going low and then back high, it resets the game. So in an arcade game, that's real beneficial if you have some kind of temporary problem. But if you have a permanent problem, what happens is the thing just watchdogs constantly. So for instance, let's say this chip screwed up. Well, if it did, the code might figure it out and then go, oh hell, that didn't work right. Reset the damn board. And so the watchdog circuit resets the board. And then it goes, oh no, it still didn't work right. Reset the board. Blah, 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 blah. And of course this thing runs really fast. So if you probe pin 40,
So it should be low when it first starts and then go high and stay high. But ours, you see what it's doing? It's basically every time it turns red, it's resetting. So this thing's resetting like 12 times a second or something like that, 5 times a second. I can't count that fast. Sometimes you can, I don't know if I can do this with one hand without blowing things up. This is the reset button here. So I'm holding down the reset button. So there's what happens when the board first comes on. The power is on the board, right? Now watch when I let go of the reset button. It immediately goes high and then does it again and again and again and again and again and again. So something is making the board reset over and over and over and over and over again. So we got to figure that out. So there's a little trick to divide the board in half and figure out what the problem is. Okay, so there is a secret circuit in the game. We're going to call it a secret circuit. That is labeled in the schematics as DMAGO, DMA-GO. I don't particularly know what all that stands for, but basically it controls all of the, there's two sides to the board. There's one side that creates the program and runs the game and all the player controls and the sounds and is the heart of the game. And then there is another side of the board that is how it creates the image on the screen. So you can, they call that the vector state. So you can have a problem in the CPU side, which is the part that creates the game, or the display side, and it's not necessarily divided in half by that, but so you know, there's some of the display chips are over here and some of the CPU chips might be up there, I don't know, but there is this one signal that runs through, and if there's a problem on the video circuit, like what it's trying to display on the screen, it will tell the watchdog to reset. If you remove this one pin from a socket so that it no longer can tell the watchdog to reset, the board will run, you just can't see it. So you are disabling the DMA-GO circuit, right? And the way you do that is chip L6, pin number 1, you lift out of a socket. So L6 on this board was not socketed. So I desoldered it, put a socket in, and then I reinstalled the same exact chip and I lifted up the first pin, which you can barely tell there. So basically the first pin is sticking out of the socket. And the reason you do that is so that you can stick it back in the socket after you get done. This board will not display anything as long as that's lifted up out of there. But it also won't make the watchdog reset if something's wrong with the display. So why do you do this? The reason you do this is because it tells you which side of the board has a problem. So if the board now runs, then what you know is the reason it was resetting before was because something in the display, the vector generator circuit was making it reset, but now can't because you've got that chip held up. If the board still doesn't run right now, well then you know it's nothing in the display section because that section isn't even connected. There's something in the CPU section. So the CPU section is the CPU chip itself, the ROM chips, the RAM chips. It could be the buffers. No, these are RAM too. These are RAM. That's a buffer. That's a buffer. So it would be something in the CPU, the ROM, or the RAM, or the chips that control that. And all of this is in the schematics, so you can search all this down. But by lifting that one pin, it's going to tell me if we've got a problem in the display side or the CPU side. Now there is the possibility that we got a problem in both sides, right? But once you lift that, you have now disabled all of the video stuff, which is very complex. It's a lot harder to fix stuff on the video side than it is on the CPU side. So we've gotten rid of all the video stuff. It doesn't even matter right now if that works. And we're going to fix the CPU stuff. So I should be able to get it running where you can hear it playing the game. It's obviously up and playing. You just can't see it. And then once we do that, we can put this back down and fix whatever the problem is in the display side. So we're going to pop it back in with that pin lifted and see what we get. Got the board back in the game, and with the DMA Go disabled, we are still resetting. So that tells us that the problem is in none of the video generation stuff, or at least there may be a problem there, but the original problem isn't there. So we've got a problem with ROMs, RAM, buffers, or the CPU. We are knee deep in it. So, like I said, it's got to be something on the CPU side. So I tried swapping the CPU chip. That didn't change anything. Getting the same thing, pin 40, constantly watchdogging. I verified all of the ROMs. This one actually had 1 bit wrong on it, so I put one in that tested fine. So all 4 ROMs test fine. This one, though, I believe only runs the display. So I said earlier that these were RAM. These are not. These are buffers. Like I originally said they were buffers, then I corrected myself. They were RAM. But there's different versions of this board, and they're laid out different. But there's different versions of this board, and they're laid out different. But these are actually buffers. These are actually RAM, and these 4 are RAM. Okay, so I swapped out the CPU. That didn't change anything. I verified all of the ROMs, including this one that had 1 bit wrong. That didn't change anything. We're still resetting. Okay, and then remember the person we got this from had put a new socket here and here. So a lot of times when you do that, you join 2 traces together or something. The guy did a great job. There wasn't anything wrong with those sockets. So I tested all the continuity. So basically, using my probes, setting the meter on continuity, you can actually, on these Atari boards, you can see the traces really well. So, like this top pin is connected to this big power trace here. You can see right there. And so I checked they're all connected as they should be. I even checked this one too, even though the socket hadn't been changed. Everything's connected like it should. He didn't screw up any of the traces. This chip is connected to, you see how a lot of the lines connect to each chip? So this chip is connected over here, and it's also connected over here where it should be. This one's connected over here where it should be, and also this way where it should be. So everything is connected fine. So then you have to see, are any of the traces connected to each other? Like, did you accidentally connect one pin to the little trace next to it? See how when you, like this pin, so if a socket was here, this pin, see how close it would be to this line that runs between the 2 pins? So you have to check to see if solder connected any of that or anything. And as best I can tell, no, none of it's connected, so everything's good. So in my opinion, the CPU is good, the ROMs are all good, the ROM sockets are all good, which moves us on to RAM. So it could be that a buffer's messed up or something, or it could be the RAM. It's very common on these boards for there to be RAM problems. If you rewind the video, I've been talking the whole time about, boy, I wish it would give us the beeps and tell us which RAM, because that's because on every damn Asteroids board, that's how you fix it. So, but usually it will give you a beep and tell you which one's bad, right? So what I've done is I've taken the very first RAM chip off the board and put a socket in its place. So that there's a RAM test, and it tells you if one of 6 RAM chips are bad. So you've got this one and this one, which are like the program RAM. It helps the ROMs and the CPU create the program. And then you've got these 4, which I believe are more of the display stuff, but I don't know for sure. But if these 2 are messed up, it may not even run the program, the way I understand it. But it does have a test code where it's supposed to tell you if even this first RAM is messed up. I don't know how it does that with a bad RAM, but maybe it uses part of the other one or something to make the test work. But for whatever reason, we're not getting any kind of test, and it's just watchdogging. So I've taken this one out. So if the test program is running, it should tell me, hey, your first RAM's screwed up. So I should get one low beep when I put it in test mode. Right now, when I put it in test mode, nothing happens. It just resets no matter what mode it's in. So if that doesn't do anything, I'm going to put a new RAM in there, and then I'm going to take this one out and see blah, 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 blah. So I'm trying to see if we can kill the program. So basically the program's resetting over and over and over again. It could be that the CPU is never even starting the program. The program would be what tells you, hey, test this RAM. If this RAM is bad, make one low beep. If this RAM is good, make a high beep, and then test this RAM. So it's running code. So if this doesn't fail, it could be because it needs that RAM to run the test. I'm not sure if it does or not, or it could be that that the program's not even running. You see what I'm saying? So we're kind of looking for a freaking bone here, people. So we're gonna do this RAM first, and then I'm gonna replace this RAM, and then we'll see what happens there. But I'm gonna put it in without that RAM, see what it does, then put a new RAM in and see if it does anything, and then do the same with this. And we're just trying to get the thing to start giving us some kind of little lifeline here. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to help this thing come back to life. You think it would cooperate a little bit, but it's probably been severely abused, so it doesn't want to cooperate yet. So maybe if we talk nice to it, it'll give us a damn RAM code error and we can start fixing it. So I don't know if this is progress or not, but after replacing the first 2 RAM chips, it's now, I mean, it's still resetting, but at least now I'm starting to get my LEDs blinking like they're supposed to when it resets. So it's doing some strange grunting. So we're getting there. I'm just going to keep replacing RAM chips. Why not, right? All right, folks, so we've made some progress. So you always got to start with the basics. So I started changing RAM. Could not get the program to do anything. So, excuse me. So basically I was trying to take out a RAM chip and then get the board to do the beep test thing and say that that RAM chip was messed up because it's missing, right? Since it would not do that, then we know that the program isn't running because it's not running the RAM test program, which is the very first thing that it does, right? So the program's not running, blah, 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 blah. So I'm checking the ROMs and making sure that the ROM sockets are good and everything seems fine. I check all of the little support chips that make the ROMs turn on and everything. Everything's cool. Swap the CPU chip, everything's cool. All of the pins for the CPU are in the socket where it's reading right. Check all the ROMs in the ROM tester, everything's cool. Swapped all of the RAM, not on this board, it's over in the cabinet. I swapped all of the RAM just because, like I said, usually you have problems, you know. So I put in the 6 sockets for the RAM so that in the future, if there is a problem, people will be able to swap them out. Can't find anything wrong with it. So I'm testing the buffer chips. They seem fine, but it just won't run the program. And then I remembered that someone had told me that on some of the boards, the ROMs go in backwards in a different order. So on Asteroids, they made several versions of the same board. So this is, let's see what we're looking at here. So here's an Asteroid -01 version. So this is the first version of the board. And see how there are all these extra sockets down here and everything? Okay, so this is a different version of the board. See how on this one it's silk screened right there? On this one it's not. It's completely different. Remember they sold so many of these. So this one, it's silk screened up here, and I don't even see a revision number on it. But you can see that all of the smaller sockets have been removed. Things are a little bit different. There's a chip missing from here, but it's instead of 2 chips, it's got 1, you know. And on this one, they were able to double up some of the chips to, you know, whatever. So there's all these different revisions of the board. Okay, so back over to the one we've been messing with. This one is a 05 revision. Now remember, they sold tons of Asteroids, tons of them. On this one, the chips are in a different place. Like these ROM chips, they're not down here, they're up here, right? See how on this one they're right down near the end, and on that one they're farther up the board. It's just a different design of the board. These are all made by Atari, right? So one of the chips is 305143, 305144, 305145. I'll go check that to make sure that's the right number. I guess I've got it right here. 35143, 35144, 35145. Okay? So in the manual, it tells you the wrong order in the schematics. So let me show you real quick. So here are the schematics. It tells you this is the dash 3 PC board, the alternate dash 3 PC board, the 04 PC board, the 05 and 06 PC board. So we've got an 05. So on all of these, it tells you that the first one in order, so like on ours, this is ours, so it's E and then H and then J are the sockets. The first one's 43, 44, 45. So that's how I had it in there. And then you see on the 04 revision, it's 3, 4, 5. They're all in order. And these were the older ones that used more chips, right? So that's how I had it in there, just like the manual said. So I had 3, so 35143, it says goes in EF2. So I had it in that one. See, now I've got 5 in there because I reversed them. So this is 3, 4, 5. But it won't do anything like that. If you do it backwards from what the manual says, 3, 4, 5, that's how it's supposed to be. It's a typo in the schematics. But only on this revision of the board. What kind of crap is that? So with the chips, the 3 chips in backwards from what it says in the manual, which apparently is correct, we still don't have the monitor on, but we've got the start buttons on, right? Blinking like they should. And so we're going to throw it into test mode and see if we get our RAM beeps or anything. Okay, so here it was 2 beeps and then 2 lower beeps. Let's see if it will do any. All right, so it's 2 beeps and then 2 lower beeps. So we'll go back out and start and see if it'll start like that. So it sounds like we're playing, but we're still getting, it's playing even though we have RAM errors. Okay, so very cool. So back in the test. So it's telling me 3 and 4 are bad. RAMs 3 and 4 are bad. So moving right along, according to the manual, these 2 RAM chips are both saying that they're bad, but if you swap them, they're fine. If you put these 2 down here, these 2 are passing, then these 2 still pass, and it still says these 2 are bad. So it's something on the board that controls those 2. So if you look on the schematics, we're talking about this one and this one. So what is common to these 2? They're both controlled by this one, right? So it could be that M5 chip, or it could be this AM10 signal, or the VRAM not, or I guess is that not? I think the not VRAM signal. So it's something in through there. So I've checked the M5 with my logic probe and everything's twinkling, but it looks kind of weird. So it could be that they're bad. Who knows? So that's where we're at. So we're trying to figure out what is it. So basically the test program, it's running the EEPROM. We've tested the EEPROM and it tests good in the EEPROM burner, but maybe it's wrong. And so the program's running. Remember, we can't see anything, we can just hear it. So the program's running, and the first thing it does is it tries to test the RAM. So it's telling us, this one's good, this one's good, oh hell, that one's bad, oh hell, that one's bad. And then it doesn't tell us anything about these 2 because it stops there. So since we know it's not the actual chips, it could be the sockets. So I checked the sockets really close. I can't find where I've screwed anything up. Maybe I have and just haven't found it yet, but it seems like the sockets are all fine. Everything's connected right. Nothing's touching together. So, you know, it would be really easy to make 2 of those little traces touch each other. And if you did, that would make where it can't send the proper signal to the RAM and get the proper signal back. But I can't find anything like that. So I'm going to try that M5 chip that kind of controls them and see if that gets me anywhere. So moving right along now, the best way to do this isn't the way that I'm doing it. Basically all I'm doing is taking educated guesses, you know, and I'm using a little logic probe to help me try to get kind of an idea of what might be the problem. But the best way to do it is with an oscilloscope, and To use an oscilloscope, though, you have to understand how the oscilloscope works. You have to understand how each chip works and what it should be doing and what you're seeing on the screen. And you have to understand kind of what the software is trying to do, which, you know, we've hit a little bit on, but I don't completely understand it. And I don't completely understand, I just haven't invested the time to use an oscilloscope yet. But an oscilloscope is a much more valuable instrument to fix stuff like this. So we're kind of just limping along using a logic probe, and I'm trying to show you how I do it, just so you know, this is kind of like the first step of learning how to be really good at repairing these. So anyway, so our problem is, of course, it's telling me that these two RAM are bad, and I was saying, well, what's the common thing between them? It's this down here. Okay, so I swapped that M5. The signals looked a little weird to me, just the way they were pulsing on the logic probe. But if you had an oscilloscope, you could tell if the signals coming in, if the waves coming in were the waves going out, or if it looked like, you know, an inverse of it, or if that's how it should look, right? So we're just doing it with a logic probe. So I replaced the M5, didn't change a freaking thing, right? Didn't fix it. So then I started thinking, well, what else? What's going on here? So I'm thinking, well, it's failing those two RAMs, but it could just be that that's the first two vector generator RAMs that it's checking, right? So it's just failing the first two. So it could be that all four of these aren't working, but it's just, it hasn't got to the other two yet. So then I started thinking, well, how would it check it? So there is this buffer over here on the schematic. Let me back out a little bit. This buffer chip here is the vector generator data buffer. And so to from MPU data bus sheet. So basically the CPU, the way it checks these RAM is the program writes to the RAM through this data buffer. So see, the MPU connects down here. These are the lines coming off the MPU. They go through this buffer, which is controlled by these signals, and then it sends information both ways. See the double arrows? It sends information both ways through these pins, this data buffer, over to the RAM and some other things, right? So if this buffer's messed up, so let's say it says, hey RAM, put the number 1000 in your RAM, and then tell me what the number is in your RAM, you know, it's basically in your memory, you know, and so the RAM replies back, you know, RFAK, and then the computer's going, that's not what I told you to put in your memory. You should be telling me 1000. And then it's going, blum, blum, both of them are bad. Flag those assholes, they're not working right, right? So it could be, though, that the buffer is, instead of sending the information, hey, put the number 1000 in your memory, it's saying, and the RAM's going, and the computer's going, that's not right, something's wrong. But it could be the buffer chip, right? So the next thing that I did was I checked the buffer. So I put the logic probe, and all of these signals were a nice strong pulse. Both the red and the green light were doing their thing. Now that doesn't really, not all of the pulsing signals are going to look like that normally, so it doesn't mean anything. But all of these signals were pulsing really strong. The red and the green light were both on at the same time. But then on this side, everything looked real weak. It was like everything, the red light was on a lot and it was clicking and stuff, but the green light hardly ever came on. And all of them were like that. Now, they are tied with a resistor to 5 volts, so it could just be that that's normal, right? So there's only one way to test it. Pretty much you have to swap the chip. So I swapped the chip. So this is our M5 chip that we replaced. Nothing happened. And here's that buffer chip that I replaced, right? New socket, new chip. Now, you're not really wasting a bunch of money when you're doing this, because if you put a chip in and there was nothing wrong with the other chip, well, you still got the old chip, and they're only about $1 anyway. You know, so we're not burning through a bunch of money here. It's a little more apparent on like the RAM are like $3 or $4, but they were all fine. And if you can remove them from the board without destroying them, which depending on the board, on these old Atari boards, usually I can. Usually, if you're very careful and you get all the solder off of the pins, they'll lift right out. On some boards, if you've watched all my videos, on some boards I just cut the chip out, you know, because it's only $1 or $2. But on these I was able to save every one of the chips that I removed. So
basically the only chip that we've replaced that I don't still have the old chip is the CPU, because one of the legs was broke off the CPU. So the other chips that I've replaced, there was nothing wrong with them, right? So I just replaced that buffer. So in regular mode, you can see that the lights are blinking like it's playing a game, like it was doing. We'll put it in test. Now remember, when we put it in test, we were getting beep, beep, which was telling us 3 and 4 are bad. So this is what we get now when we put it in test. Did you hear that? Just one little beep. Which is what a fully working Asteroids board does when you put it in test. It just beeps one time. So when we hit the buttons, it may beep some more. Let's see. All right. So the test is working, but there's nothing on the screen. But remember, we disabled all of the vector side stuff, right? So we had to put that little pin back in the socket. So let's try that and see what we get. Now I think the monitor's screwed up, but we'll try it just to see. All right, so I put the leg of that one chip back down in it, so now the vector side is back up and running. And so when you turn it on, you still do not get anything on the monitor. We will work on that next. But look, we're in attract mode and the lights are blinking. We're on free play. So our thrust sound's not working, but it sounds like we're up and running. We just can't see it, right? So next thing is the monitor. We're going to talk a little bit about the board again though. Okay, so I'm going to review quickly just in case some of our viewers got lost about halfway through. I've had people message me and say that they have, so I'm going to try to I try to make this stuff simple. If you're like an expert on this stuff, you don't need to watch this video anyway. You know, so I'm trying to help out people that maybe want to learn more about it or whatever. So we started out with a broken Asteroids board. It wasn't doing crap, right? And so the first thing that we did was we looked at the LED lights and they were just stuck on. Okay. So the next thing that we did was we tested all the power on the board, and with the way that we knew what was supposed to be there is we looked at the schematics that are available online. You can get them for free. So we downloaded the schematics and found out what power is supposed to be on the board. We checked all of the power and made sure that all of the power was right that was supposed to be on the board. That all comes off the power supply and the power brick down at the bottom of the game. Once we figured out all the power was right, the next thing that we checked was the reset pin, pin 40 on the CPU board. And we saw that it was resetting over and over and over again. That's because the watchdog was going off because the game wasn't running code. So after messing around for a long time and checking this and checking that and swapping out RAM and all kinds of stuff, I figured out that I had the ROMs in the wrong spot. So the reason that was messing me up was because the CPU was trying to talk to the ROM to get the instructions to what it's supposed to do with this board, right? So this CPU is a 6502 chip. It's used in all kinds of things. It's just the computer, the central processing unit, you know, it's the CPU. So it needs to be told what to do. So it needs RAM. So it's the CPU, RAM, and ROMs. So I had the ROM in the wrong socket. So it wasn't able to find the code. It was reading the code that was in the chip in that socket, but it was like, if there's 3, it was like, you know, it was starting at the, you know, 2/3 of the way through the code, so it didn't know what to do. So it wasn't running right. So eventually we got that in there. Now in the meantime, I had, because this is an Asteroids PCB, it would be specific just to this board. This one chip, you know, there's a little trick on Asteroids where if you lift up that one pin, it makes it where it divides the board in half. So we were trying to get just the computer part to run. And so the computer is the part that creates the program, creates the game, and then the rest of the board is the part that makes it the visual part, because Asteroids and its vector monitor, you know, of course, was a very good looking game at the time. So we lifted that pin and it was still resetting and not doing its thing, which led us to believe that the problem was that there was at least a problem in the CPU section. There may also be a problem in the video section. We don't know yet. We don't know that yet because we don't have the monitor working, right? So I swapped RAM and everything, and what I was attempting to do was to pull out one of these RAM chips, and then it should give me an error and say, hey, that RAM chip's bad. But it wasn't ever doing that because I had the ROM in the wrong socket. So once I got the ROM in the right socket,
the program came up and said, you know, I'd replace these 2 RAM and all 4 of these RAM. The program came up and said, hey, these 2 RAM are bad. Beep, beep, boom, boom. That's just a little program that is running in the test mode. Now, keep in mind that the game was still playing. Remember, when I had it in a track, you could start it and play it. But if you put it in test, it said these 2 RAM were bad. So why was it still playing? Because these are the vector RAM. They're used to help generate the signal, right? I mean the video. So the game was still up and playing. It's just you couldn't see it, and all of the vector RAM, 2 of them were bad. So we start looking around. We eventually figure out that this buffer chip, so the CPU talks through the buffer chip into the RAM, and then the RAM talked back through the buffer chip into the CPU. We figured out that this buffer chip was screwed up. So it wasn't that these 2 RAM were bad. It was that all 4 of these RAM it couldn't talk to. It just, these were the first 2 on the test. So it was saying, hey, at least those 2 are bad. Right? So we swapped the buffer, and now we're up to where everything seems to be playing right. So I put the pin back in to turn on the video side again, right? So now the video side's on, and we still don't have an image on the game. That's because, likely, the monitor's messed up. Well, I've never seen a signal on the monitor. Now, we still could have problems. There still could be distortions in the image and things like that, but just not bad enough that it's resetting the game. So basically, the CPU and the computer and the RAM, they tell the board, hey, do a bunch of stuff and send out a picture. This is the output area of the video, and send out a picture up to the monitor, right? Well, if it's anywhere in through about halfway through, and it's not physical, so I'm not saying this chip and this chip, I'm just saying halfway through the flow of the program. If it's about halfway through and something bad happens, the board has a way of sensing that happens because it's writing the watchdog code into the program. So if some chips don't respond back to a certain address in the code, it knows that there's a problem and it resets the game. Well, it's not resetting now. So at least maybe most of the game is up and running. But it could be that the signal that it's sending out for the video is all screwed up and it doesn't look right. Now, if I had an oscilloscope, I could just hook it into these Y out and X out and hook it up on the oscilloscope and actually see the game playing on the oscilloscope, like on the screen of the oscilloscope. I think I actually did that in a video a long time ago, and we could do that again, but I don't feel like dragging the thing out. Instead, what I'm going to do, I mean, we will do that if we can't figure out this monitor, but instead what I'm going to do is we're going to work through the monitor, which we haven't seen any video on. Who knows if it's ever even been worked on. There might just be fuses blown or whatever. So that's our next little thing that we'll look through. Okay, folks, so that's it for this video. We got the board at least trying to play. We can't see it yet, but I'm just trying to show you some of the preliminary stuff to work through a completely dead board, which we just did, right? And we've got it kind of doing its thing, we think. But this video is getting long in the tooth, so we'll once again separate out the monitor repair for a future video. That'll be the next part. So we've done one video on power supply problems, second video on, oh my god, the board is dead problems, and now we're up to a third video that we'll have to film of, oh my monitor problems. And then I know for a fact that this board has at least one audio problem because you cannot hear the thrust sound whenever you hit the thrust button. But in the test mode, when you hit the thrust button, it beeps. So the button's working, it's just not making the thrust sound. So on the next video, I guess we'll do the monitor. Once we get it up, we'll see if there's any visual problems on the board and repair them and repair that thrust sound at least. So there may be other stuff that pops up too once we can see it. But we are systematically walking through bringing this Asteroids back to life, and that's the way you do it. You start literally at the plug coming in from the wall, fix the first thing that the power goes into, and then the next thing that the power goes into, and then the next thing that the power goes into, and we are now up to the top of the cabinet where the monitor is. Right? So we'll do that on the next one. But notice how the way that you fix it is you do it in a system. You do it in order. You don't try to fix the board if you haven't messed with the power supply and know that the power supply is right. You don't try to fix the monitor if you haven't even got the freaking board running. You know, it's all in order. You gotta get things working in order. And the sound. Remember, the sound was messed up. So you know you have to do it step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and that's the only way that you can systematically get everything on the machine working. So I hope you enjoyed it. Leave the comments below. Give us a thumbs up for taking the trouble to film it for you. Look at those beautiful lights blinking because it's in a track mode. Fantastic. Leave your comments below, and we will see you on the next video where we'll fix that monitor.